Hi guys, I'm really excited today to introduce to you my dear friend Sylvia Gonner. She's what you would consider a cultural whiz. She actually grew up in Europe and then moved here to go to college, and she never left. She loves to teach and study cross-cultural relations, and she's worked primarily in the international business her entire career. And with that job, she's been able to travel to more than 70 countries worldwide. She is what you'd consider an expert in cross-cultural communications and helps people improve their cultural awareness and literacy. So I'm really proud to introduce her to us. She's going to talk to us about cultural diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So Sylvia?
Thank you, Lisa, and Tim, thank you, and hi everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to your program.
So diversity and inclusion, these are buzzwords that we hear a lot these days. So what is it? They're two separate things. Diversity represents the mix of people, and inclusion is how this mix of people can best interact, relate to each other, and work together. The diversity mix includes many things: gender, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, religion, disability, and increasingly in the global environment, culture. And ethnicity and culture aren't synonymous, because within each ethnic group, you will find many cultures. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm a culture whiz. Cultures are my specialty. So I will focus more specifically on cultural diversity and inclusion. But the principles I will touch on are universal. I'm hoping to raise awareness of what makes us so different, because if we understand diversity and where it comes from, we can learn to be more inclusive. So what makes me an expert? Lisa touched on it. I was very lucky to be born in Brussels, Belgium, at the heart of Europe, the birthplace of the European Union, a very multilingual, multicultural environment. And at age 20, I moved to Miami, which was a complete culture shock for me. Not only did I have to adjust to the American lifestyle, but if you know Miami, it was, again, I was immersed in a complete melting pot of new cultures. And so I learned English and Spanish. And so today I speak a total of 6 languages. This background and a degree in international relations put me to work in global companies that have allowed me to travel around the world, to meet with people and to work with people in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, Latin America, and has exposed me to more cultures. So learning, writing, teaching about cultural differences is my passion. I blog about this, if you're interested, at theculturewiz.com. So what do we mean by culture? I think of it like the operating system of your brain. It's the set of beliefs, values, traditions, behaviors that distinguish one group of people from another. So culture is programmed into our minds from a very young age. For example, when a Latin American couple takes their newborn home at night, they're likely to place that baby in close proximity to the mother, where that child will probably sleep for the first 2 years of its life. Contrast that with maybe a British couple where the baby is likely to sleep in its own crib, in their own room. And so these traditions are based on values that they just become part of us. What we experience growing up becomes an intimate part of our beliefs, and the beliefs impact our behaviors. And essentially, your culture will somehow stay with you for life, even when you migrate to another country. So for those of you born in America, let me read you this list of American values that I found on the US State Department website. They're fundamentally ingrained in you: independence, equality, directness, innovation, informality, consumerism, patriotism, individualism, meritocracy, and effective use of time. These are not universal values. So I want to talk to you about a couple of these to show you how they are contrasted in other countries. Individualism, for example, as opposed to collectivism. So in America, we value individual achievements, individual freedom, and the personal independence and self-reliance that we teach our kids from the day we send them off into the world. But many other cultures will put the needs of the group and of their communities ahead of their own. Children will, live with their parents until they get married. Grandparents move back in with the family rather than being placed in a nursing home. Companies will celebrate group achievements rather than highlighting sort of the employee of the month that is very popular here in the US. You know, it took a pandemic for Americans to put the well-being of the group ahead of their own. This doesn't come natural to Americans because we value individualism, but it's a way of life for people in Malaysia or in Nigeria or in New Zealand, cultures that favor collectivism over individualism. Another value, directness. In America, we say it like it is. Be clear, don't beat around the bush. We value people who are honest and upfront. Other cultures are more subtle, less explicit, less direct. Now, why is that? The US is a very young country, a very young culture, and it's not very homogenous. So we have a mix of religions and a lot of different ethnic groups that are all coexisting in America. So America, think about it like the newlywed couple that they don't know each other that well yet. And they must be very clear and explicit to avoid misunderstandings. You know, honey, I would prefer if you put the dirty dishes in the dishwasher, not on the coffee table. That sounds pretty familiar to a newlywed couple. But contrast that with the Japanese culture, a very old, ancient culture, very homogenous. Most people practice the same religion, have the same ethnic background
for centuries. And so there's a Japanese expression that says to read the air, because the Japanese people prefer to leave things unsaid. Think of Japan like your grandparents who've been married for 50 years and they just have to look at each other to know exactly what the other one means. So direct, indirect, I'm giving you the contrast of two cultures that could not be more apart, and there's many along the spectrum. So what about our perception of time? Another American value, we value time. We expect meetings to start on time. We arrive on time. If we're invited to make a presentation to last no more than 15 minutes, and I'll tell you that was a bit of a stretch for me, but we prepare accordingly. Not so elsewhere. Like, why is that? Some cultures view time as relative to other things. Maybe the environment they live in. Like take India, for example. If you live in Mumbai, life is chaotic. Trains don't run on time. Traffic is massive. It's impossible to predict how long it will take to do a trip to work or to a friend's house. The same is true in many countries in Africa and the Middle East, where the extreme heat or power outages or other physical roadblocks will have an impact on time and punctuality, and they have for decades. But it's not just about the environment, it's also about a matter of priorities. Like in countries where people put tremendous value on relationships, bless you, time per se becomes less of a priority. In Latin American countries, for example, helping a neighbor find their cat, or taking care of a grandparent in need, or even helping a perfect stranger change a tire on your way to work will be more important than arriving on time. And so what you can see from these examples is that our behaviors are ingrained in beliefs that are impacted by our environment, our history, our traditions. And what's really important to remember is that no culture is superior to another. Yes, human beings are fundamentally the same everywhere. But because of their culture, people around the world have very different ways to view the world, to communicate, to build trust, to value authority, to express disagreement, and on and on. So our cultural diversity can make it difficult to be in sync, to operate in harmony with each other. Well, let's talk about inclusion. To have greater inclusion, we first need to understand and appreciate our differences. So I'm going to share with you 3 habits you can develop to enhance what I call your cultural literacy, and in turn improve your cultural dexterity. Like cultural literacy is the ability to appreciate cultural differences, and dexterity is how you can operate effectively across cultures. And that's helpful not only in the workplace, but in everyday life. So here's the 3 habits to develop. Be curious, be aware, be open. Be curious about cultures. Culture is often compared to an iceberg. The vast majority lies under the surface. You can only see the tip of the iceberg. And the same is true with cultures. You can only observe some behaviors. And if you take these at face value and don't look further below the surface to try to understand what values are driving these behaviors and actions, you will likely misinterpret them. So chances are, if someone from a different country is doing something that makes absolutely no sense to you, it's because of their culture. So be curious, ask questions, seek to understand before you make assumptions. The second habit to be culturally literate is to be aware of your own cultural beliefs. You cannot begin to appreciate diversity in others if you're not aware of your own cultural filters, the lenses that you wear when you look at the world, what you value and how that impacts your behavior. It takes effort to study your own behavior and your own cultural, surprisingly, because it's so ingrained in us, we take it for granted. If you Google US State Department, so you're an American, you will land on a site where you can learn about your own culture, and there's tons of fun exercises to actually learn about other cultures and learn to operate in other cultures. Finally, to be culturally literate, you must be open to other perspectives, open to people thinking and doing things differently than what you've been taught or what just seems natural to you. Your culture is not superior to others. Your way is not the only way. Remember, this works for all types of diversity groups, including people of different genders and generations. So be open and inclusive to people you may not look, act, or sound like. Chances are you will get much better results if you work across teams that are diverse rather than when everybody comes from the same group. Like, for example, some cultures are predisposed to be rule breakers, and other cultures and some people are predisposed to be rule followers. If you put them together on a project, you know, the rule breakers, the rule followers will make sure that the project gets done on time and that it will achieve the results and the goal set. The rule breakers will bring in innovation and out of the box thinking to the project. And together, this will result in both a creative and a very efficient outcome. So inclusiveness is about learning to operate well with a mix of people that are different than you. Let me repeat that. Inclusiveness is about learning to operate with a mix of people that are different than you. You have to learn this. It's not a given for most of us. First, learn to be curious about others. Be aware of your own beliefs and behaviors. Be open to other way of thinking and doing things. Only then can you learn to be inclusive, to stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone. It doesn't mean you have to compromise your beliefs in the process, because you don't have to. The goal is to be inclusive within your own comfort zone. It's called a zone for a reason, because it's an area, it's a range. And this comfort zone is something you have the ability to stretch without compromising your own beliefs and values, without losing your identity in the process. Inclusiveness is about stretching yourself and appreciating that we're all different for a reason, and that we can be a better version of ourselves when we bring diversity together. And that's what makes our world so beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And guys, we'll be posting like her blog as well as her own social media, so you guys can keep in contact with Sylvia and read her blog. I did have a question for you. I love how you talk about getting out of your comfort zone. What do you think was the largest culture shock for you in all of your travels, like a specific place or an event?
That's a good question. I have so many, but I think the greatest culture shock often comes from cultures that are so, so different than our own. And so for me, it was probably my very first experience working with people from Japan, because they are so different. And I really fell on my face, because I did not know then that when Japanese people very graciously agree with you and tell you that they're going to give you the funds to that you need for the project, which I went to my boss's office and I said, yes, we've got it. I was young and naive, and I did not understand that that culture is one where people make decisions through a collective process, where there is consensus building, and where no Japanese person would ever tell you, I'm not sure, no, I don't believe so. And so I fell on my face that very first experience I had with that culture, and it probably is what made me want to learn more about it, and really take this to a level where I really can appreciate that you should never take anything for granted.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Sylvia before we let her go?
Less of a question and just probably more general commentary. It was actually pretty interesting. So my background, I actually grew up in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, and my dad was a taxi driver. And so during the summers, just think back at it now, which I really appreciate. We had people from cruise ships from all over the world, and so it was pretty insightful to just kind of hear people's stories, where they're from, realize that we're different, but for the most part we're the same. And one thing that's carried through in my life is just being curious of where people are from, just asking questions, just open up in the conversation, and you realize that you learn so much just by just being able to say, hey, where are you from? What do you do? What's been your experience in life? And you learn a lot by just some of those simple conversations. So I really appreciate this discussion, because it's reminded me of a lot of things that I've experienced in my life. And one of the reasons why I love this interview is we come across so many different people, and we're able to have these discussions.
Thank you so much for that comment. I love St. Thomas, as Lisa knows. I go there every year. It's a beautiful place, and it is a very diverse place. And I would agree with you that, the first thing to do is really to just be curious and ask questions and try to learn. And it applies for, all types of diversity, but it's not something that we're necessarily predisposed to do. And so I think it's part of, it's sometimes easier when people look very different than we do. And we then have that assumption that, they must be different. But there's so much diversity, within different ethnic groups as well. And, again, something I'm passionate about these days is sort of the diversity that currently exists within different generations, because we all have to work in an environment where, we are working side by side with people from just about every age group and every decade, and that has its own challenges. If you are interested in this topic more, I recommend a couple books that I love. This one is called The Culture Map. It's really excellent, and it's a super easy read, full of sort of anecdotes and great stories, and it puts the different countries of the world on a series of different maps according to the way they perceive trust, the way you build relationships, the way you perceive time, etc. And then this other one I absolutely love, I'm currently reading. It's a novel. It's called Americana, and it's a story, it's a fiction, but it's a story of a Nigerian woman that moves to America, and she becomes a blogger. But it's really fascinating, because it really, for the first time, she has to grapple with what it's like to be Black, because she didn't experience that when she lived in her home country. And so those are really good books I would recommend if you're interested in this topic some more.
No, thank you. That's awesome.
Awesome. Anybody else have any questions?
I did. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
So with people that are born in America, obviously, we've all come from all these different backgrounds and cultures, and it seems with every generation you kind of lose a little bit of the original culture. Like I'm half Italian. So my grandparents were born in Italy, and with every generation, we kind of lose some of that. And having so many other influences from my mother's side, how do you, I guess, what do you recommend to kind of reconcile within ourselves, learning our own cultures when we have so many different varying backgrounds, and then coming into Americanizing everything? Because there's some things where I can focus on individualism, and other things I am more collectivism. So how do you recommend kind of reconciling that within ourselves to get to know ourselves better?
That's an excellent question, Susan, because again, as I mentioned, America is a melting pot. It's such a young culture that we are, a mix of so many coming together. And, if you're first or second or third generation in this country, you will likely experience this clash of cultures within your own environment, within your own family. And then you take that to a workplace or to your family, or maybe to the person that you marry. I mean, we are all dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. We have a new neighbor that moves in that could be from the Philippines, or our mother-in-law from Puerto Rico, or, it's just, it's so much part of what we live here, and less so in some other countries that are a little bit more homogenous. So what I think, this country is still developing some of that, and is more open and more tolerant in that regard, in the sense that, we have to be very explicit. A lot of the cultural traits that we develop here is because of this mix that we do have. So we learn to adjust accordingly. And again, I think it's just all about trying to understand what drives you and how you make your decisions, and maybe studying a little bit and trying to figure out where that came from, because likely that some of it did come from, your upbringing at a young age, and some of the things that our parents will instill in us, if they're, from another country, if they were born elsewhere, it'll stay with you for your life. And so it's not, cultures aren't that, they don't have these barriers. That's why this culture map shows this spectrum, that goes along all of these. And again, cultures aren't necessarily, I'm here and you're there. It's always relative to another culture. So you might be a little bit more, focused on task-based than a culture that is more focused on relationship-based. And, but you might be less than another culture. I mentioned how direct Americans are, but Dutch people are way more direct than Americans. If you've ever dealt with anybody in the Netherlands, they will not hesitate to tell you that your idea is stupid, that you're wrong. They don't mean to insult. They just want to be very direct, because for them, it's important. They don't want to be misunderstood. Anything less than being blunt would be considered mistrust. And we're a little bit more tactful here in the US, and we wouldn't say things in that way. So when you know that you're in a setting where there are people from different cultures coming together, if you work in an environment, if you have a client that is based in another country, study it, spend some time researching it. There's tons and tons of resources available where you can actually, look into it and be ready and prepared for it, so you don't make major cultural blunders that, can cause you a relationship, a business deal, or just embarrassment.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Sylvia. We're going to let Sylvia go, and again, all of her social and everything will be posted on ours along with this recording. So hopefully we can share this awesome talk that Sylvia gave us with the world. I want to say thank you again, and thank you, Lisa, for introducing Sylvia. We'll let you go, and then we just got a couple company announcements afterwards, guys.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you all. It was a pleasure to meet you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.